So this will be a tier list for the power level of these heroes in Season 8 post Mauga launch into comp. And this will be for below GM. Although I still believe that like GM5, GM4 are essentially not very different from Plat Diamond. But for the sake of clarity, this is for roughly below GM. Obviously there's going to be some discrepancies between Bronze and Master. But I do think by and large Overwatch plays pretty similar across the ranks from my experiences on multiple accounts. So let's get to it. We'll start with Bastion. I haven't seen a lot of people play Bastion, but in my heart I still believe he's S tier. No, we're gonna go for just meta strength. The tier list is just based for the meta strength of the heroes for this season. I'm gonna put Bastion in A tier, not because I don't think he's arguably the best DPS in the game, and also one of the easiest DPS in the game to play. I'm not putting him in S simply because I don't know how many people are gonna play Bastion this season, and in certain compositions he might not work well, but I still think he's hyper strong, and if you want a free win, probably just want to pick Bastion when you're losing. Cassidy, I'm going to put only good for counter pick because I don't think he's a massively strong character. His fucking hindered is a great way to interrupt particularly characters like a Doomfist or a Ball who are harassing your team. And let's say you don't want to go Sombra for the same effect. Cassidy still does the same job while maybe providing more of a direct frontline threat more than Sombra. I think D.Va will be A tier in this season just because Mauga's dominance. So far, we'll see what emerges as... Actually, as I put D.Va here, let me explain Mauga. And I'm just going to go up and put Mauga straight up in S tier, because I do think he's kind of giga busted. But I also think that it's very circumstantial what's going to happen. The way I see it right now, and of course, the devs could at any point after releasing this list, they could make some changes or emergency patch. But I essentially see 3 states of Overwatch, right? There's the neither team is running Mauga, in which case it doesn't matter, obviously. Like, the game goes back to normal, and, you know, the normal, like, this character beats this character, and this character is strong versus this character, that resumes. When both teams are running Mauga, it is simply a case of who's running better supports. As long as, like, the one Mauga can be 10 out of 10 and the other Mauga can be 7 out of 10, and it still wouldn't matter as long as the supports were better. And by better, I mean if you're running Ana Kiriko and they're running Mercy Lifeweaver, you just lose. Like, you win for free, they lose. Or again, if you're running like Moira Mercy and they're running Ana Kiriko or like Kiriko Zen or Ana Zen or something, you just lose. And then if one team is running Mauga, then it becomes a bit context dependent. It depends, like, what are his supports running? What are your supports running? What are you doing? What are they doing? I'm going to assume that, you know, we're going to play a little bit around Mauga's strength because you're going to be forced to address a lot of Maugas going forwards. I imagine that as the more the season goes on, more people who are on the freemium pass will unlock Mauga, and people will understand as well that Mauga's kind of nuts. I do think a lot of the heroes' power level will depend on Mauga, and that's where we return to D.Va. D.Va, I think, at the moment, amongst all the theory crafting, seems to be the best answer to Mauga if you don't want to run your own Mauga. Because DMing him when he pops his heal button, it's E on the keyboard, I don't know what it is in console. But when he pops his self-heal, the Everybody Riot, you kind of just want to DM in his face. And that's, like, at the moment, the best answer. And you can also micro-missile his face because he's got a massive hitbox. So you can do a lot of damage to him, and you can be one of the few people who can negate him. And if he's trying to sustain, the way Mauga works is he sustains by doing damage, obviously. So if you can interrupt his sustain at key moments, he falls over. So if you nade him, obviously he dies. But if he's like on this threshold, you'll notice a lot when you play against Mauga or you play as Mauga, he'll kind of be teetering on this threshold of, like, let's say 300 HP or something, just above his armor level. He's going to hold down M1, M2 and shoot the tank, presumably, because that's his way of self-healing. If you can interrupt him at that moment for like even a second or half a second, he drops below his armor health and he stops self-healing, he will crumble at that point. But that's the key of interrupting at that point, and also the Mauga not getting to escape, because he may have saved his charge, and you should do this. If you get naded, save your charge and charge away. So all these contexts are important, but I think D.Va's ability to interrupt that cycle of sustain is what will put her in S8 tier. I think I might put Genji in good enough. I don't think he's particularly strong, but I also think he may find opportunities to be good, especially in an era where you're going to see a lot of Ana. The fact that you can reliably get nanoblades pretty often, and if you want to play Genji blade bot, you can probably farm off a Mauga pretty easily, just your ult. So I think if you're on a Blade bot, you're expecting a nano, you can actually make Genji work, but it also depends on your own competence as a Genji. It's not free like some of these other heroes we'll talk about. I'm putting Hanzo in A tier. I think a lot of Hanzo mains will complain about this assessment. I have always disliked Hanzo, but I think what we're going to see here is a lot of sustain-based compositions again. You're going to see a lot of Overwatch is going to come down to 2 tanks fighting, 2 supports on either side trying to keep them up, and everyone's just healing and surviving forever. And as always, the ability to one-shot in all of that is huge. So the ability to like suddenly take out one of their supports who are trying to keep the Mauga up, or trying to take your Mauga down, or just anyone tank in general, I think makes Hanzo A tier. He's not necessarily as reliable as other DPS because obviously it's a bit hit and miss. But I think for any vaguely competent Hanzo, the ability to just like pick off a support is great. And also I think if you're in the lower ends of the medal ranks, what you will find is if there's a lot of Anas, they're going to hard scope and just not pay attention. So Ana's hard scope a lot. So if you're looking for an easy target to kill, look for the hard scoped Ana who is not moving. I'm going to put Junkrat in map dependent. If it wasn't a tier list for below GM, I would probably put Junkrat in bad. I don't actually think he's very good. I think most tanks can kind of deal with him. But I have enough knowledge of the medal ranks to know how terrorizing a Junkrat is. I think you will probably feel the annoyance of a Junkrat more than actually he is annoying. But there'll definitely be certain maps that are choke heavy that you're going to really suffer against the Junkrat. So I think on a certain map, you're going to really not like going up against Junkrat. But in a lot of other scenarios, you actually probably would rather they run Junkrat than a different DPS. Lucio, I think bad. I'm going to just put straight up say it. Here's the thing about Lucio. As always, you will see a lot of Lucio in pro play, right? Like Lucio is a great enabler of pro play. Outside of pro play, it's much different a situation. And I genuinely, again, like I said, a lot of this season is going to come down to what lineup are your supports running? Like how are your supports complementing each other? Or the tank matchup, more importantly, probably. The Lucio speed boost is just not necessary. Like you don't really actually go in as Mauga, you just kind of poke. You're kind of keeping a safe distance. So you actually don't want to Lucio speed your Mauga in, like that would just be bad. I mean, you could arguably Lucio speed your Mauga out, should he get naded and things like that, but again, I fully have never ever seen a random rank Lucio properly engage and disengage in Overwatch 2. It's last time was in Overwatch 1 I've ever seen anyone do that. And that's me currently in GM4 on tank. So if I have not seen a good Lucio, there's no chance you guys in Masters below are going to see a Lucio who's going to control the engagement the way a Lucio needs to be good. And my guess is if you're running Lucio and they're running better supports, it's over. You just lose the tank matchup, lose the game. Mei, I would put her in the counter pick. I only ever see people pick Mei for counter picking, but she is decent. I'm going to put Mei in map dependent. I'm just going to split the difference. I wanted to put her either in good enough or only good for counter pick. I'm going to split the difference and put her in map dependent. Most of the time, whenever I see people pick Mei, it's because they suck at any other DPS or they've tried another DPS and it failed. And then they just pick Mei and chase the enemy tank around. And that is often an effective strategy and will be often effective against an enemy tank who's like a certain tank hero. So like a Reinhardt or even a Sigma, it's actually very good against if he's out of position, which they will be a lot. The power of the efficacy of whether you're chasing enemy tank around, wall them and chase them, M1 on them, is good or not will depend a lot on the map and also on who they pick. There are certain tanks that are just not that helpful to be chasing around, and there's others that are. I don't think she'll be hyper effective against Mauga because I think he sustains and she's got a fairly big hitbox. So if she's not careful, he's actually sustaining off of her. I don't think him getting walled off is a huge problem, so I think he can sustain for the immediate term. The only time it would be really bad is if you wall and then he gets naded, then he can't charge away. But I think in general, I don't think she's going to interact in the Mauga too well in your solo queue games. Mei in pro level, very different. I'm just going to say it, guys. Hot take, Mercy bad. I'm just going to say it. Hot take, Mercy bad. You're going to see with the support, it's not to do with the power of Mercy. I think Mercy is a fine hero. Like in isolation, Mercy is perfectly fine and will enable a certain DPS really well. But this season will be defined by the supports interacting with the tank. Mercy, if you got a Mercy on your team and they are running like Ana Kiriko, you auto lose. Like if you're running Mauga, auto lose, it's over. Like I think you'd have to be like twice as good on every other character. In like the rest of your team would have to be twice as good to make up the differential. I still think Pharah good enough. I don't think people play a lot of Pharah. this has always been the case with Pharah. There's just not that many Pharah players outside of like that high elo Europe diff where all the Saudi Arabians love running Pharah. And so we never really get a proper power level gauge of Pharah. But she's always just doing her thing. Like, she still remains a character that, if uncountered, farms your team. Like, if you don't have something that shoots up, you just get farmed. And if your hit scan are bad, you get farmed. Or maybe they're running Pharah Mercy and you're not helping your hit scan deal with the Pharah Mercy. So, I still think she's good. Just not particularly strong and not particularly bad. Reaper. Okay, I think I'm going to go with my gut instinct for Reaper, which is to say good enough. Purely because, again, Mauga land will enable a lot of just like... It is unfortunately very brainless. As fun as Mauga seemed on release, Mauga land enables a lot of like 2 tanks staring at each other, holding their shoot buttons at each other. Everyone's pumping everything into the tanks, and everyone's just fighting in a very fairly narrow area. And in that situation, Reaper's very good. Reaper gets up in their face, he's pew pew pew, shotguns, good against big hitbox Mauga, good with a Mauga. He's good in the cage, which is an important thing to think about. Like when Mauga pops his cage ult, Reaper is great. You're happy to step in there as Reaper because now you're in your effective range. And I've already seen a few games or had a few games where I've had Reapers in my team farm alongside me when I'm playing Mauga, and Reapers on the enemy team are having a good time playing with Mauga. Assuming the power level of Mauga, I think Reaper very good. In situations where that's not happening, he's very bad. In situations where there isn't a Mauga, people are playing quite long range, he's kind of bad. Reinhardt, I'm going to put Rein in map dependent. I don't think he'll be great in the Mauga matchup. As much as you can shield. So we talked about earlier how like you kind of want to interrupt the Maugas when he's healing himself at a critical time. In theory, the Reinhardt can do that and pop his shield up when the Mauga is really looking to self-heal. But I think we're talking that at like the highest level. I think you're going to see a lot of metal rank Reinhardts get their shield shredded before the fight has even begun. Because like, assuming someone's of like an average skill level, I think it's much easier for the Mauga to shred the Rein than the Rein to shred the Mauga. And so, I think you're going to see... Rein is still always good in the middle ranks just because Rein, big shield man, he's very overstated. Like, he's got a huge shield, a lot of HP, swings hard. And so, for that reason, I'm bumping him up. But I think largely it's going to come down to, is this map Reinhardtable or not? And if not, I don't think he's going to perform too well. Hog is actually the best fucking tank outside of Mauga. And I think there will come a reckoning when the community will realize this. I think some people have realized this. I've seen some creators realize this. And some people complaining about this, players complaining about this. Hog is absolutely busted as shit. And people just have not caught on in the solo queue environment. This guy is a terror. If you do not have an Ana, he just does not die. And there's 2 things that could threaten to elevate him up to S tier. So if you're watching this tier list in the future, there's 2 things to look out for. A, does Ana Nade get nerfed? And does Mauga get nerfed? Because if either of them get nerfed, Hog rises. At the moment, you're going to see... Mauga is an incredible counterpick to Hog. He basically, like, there's nothing Hog can do to kill this guy except ult. The only time Mauga will lose to a Hog is if he ults him, or if Hog hooks the Mauga in and he gets naded and then, like, crowd controlled so he can't run away. I've already had quite a few games of Mauga against Hog, and there's just, like, you just never die unless you cage fight and he whole hogs you. Like, those are the only situations. But even then, you can live if you hold your E. If you E inside the cage and you hold M1, M2, he's whole hogging, you still just out DPS him and you live. But at that point, again, if you do get interrupted for even a second, you're just dead. Like, if anything interrupts you for a second, you're dead. As Mauga, I mean. I think Soldier is, like, on the low end of good enough. I would have put him in map dependent if it actually did matter on the map. It's not that he's map dependent, he's just kind of, like, inoffensive and mediocre. I don't think he's ever going to take over a game. Like, you're very rarely going to be like, wow, that Soldier's destroying everyone. Never a bad pick either. Like, you know, he does solid damage. His ult can be very good in the right context. Especially when nano boosted, which, as we said, there's going to be a lot of Anas. So good enough. Reliable and good enough. Symmetra, pretty much the poster child of map dependent. Obviously, her playstyle has gotten a bit more fluid. People have gotten a bit better at, like, figuring out where you can run Symmetra. But in general, it's still a Lijiang Tower S tier situation. A lot of other maps, not so much situation. I think Torb will go at the high end of good enough. I'm sort of tempted to put him in A tier because I still believe that they didn't really nerf him that hard. Like, he's still pretty viable. The turret is still pretty good. I think the things that Torb is good against, though, are not necessarily going to get played too much. Like, Torb's ability to just, like, destroy flankers is not really relevant right now unless you are seeing a lot of flankers in this specific game that you're in. I think he was more effective when people were running a lot more like Tracer Genji. And even though Tracer got buffed, you're not really seeing a lot of Tracer because of this whole like spam the tank meta that exists right now. And again, the power of the supports to kind of dodge a Tracer engagement is still very high. Which leads us nicely to talk about Tracer. You know, I will say she's A tier still, just because I think a very good player will find Tracer and find value. But I think people were a bit afraid with the Tracer buff that she'd kind of take over, but I don't think that's happened because she's not actually the best pick in the whole Mauga mirror situation. I think Widowmaker map dependent and potentially point dependent as well. Like some maps, the A point is good, but the B point is bad, or vice versa. Still a very good hero in many regards and still capable of like swinging games very rapidly, but suffers from, like I said, certain maps not being good for her. And in like a Mauga situation, I don't think she really helps. Unlike Hanzo, she can't really exist in that mid-range. Like Hanzo has his ability to kind of leap and wall climb around and kind of dodge stuff and is still very lethal at mid-range and even close range. Whereas Widowmaker, you literally do have to be really far back. And that opens you up to getting Sombra, which we'll talk about in a moment. For that reason, I think we'll put her in map dependent. I'm putting Winston in good enough. I think Winston's actually very good on his own again in a vacuum. Very good. And I personally still find situations to pick Winston. I think you should also find situations to pick Winston because he still remains a great answer to like if the enemy are running double hit scan and they're just like threatening your team too much. Winston's amazing. It's kind of engaging on them, bubble to cut them off, and jump out, buy your team like a good 6-7 seconds of time to then potentially kill the enemy tank or kill something else. So Winston's very good. The problem for Winston remains A, still probably the easiest tank to counterpick. B, is bad against Mauga. Mauga just farms this guy. There's like nothing you can do. Absolute terrible matchup. And so if you look at it, again, one of the things about Overwatch is it's very relative, especially on the tank role. With Hog and Mauga being so good, Winston cannot be good, right? If these two are very good, Winston just cannot, because at any moment, if those two heroes are being run, you're getting farmed on Winston. So I don't think this is an indication that Winston is weak or needs a buff. I just think at this current meta state, Winston is not the one. Zarya, I think, actually a potential A tier. Because like D.Va, she possesses the ability to kind of shut down and interrupt the windows that Mauga and Hog are looking for. So obviously with Zarya against Hog, you can bubble the thing that he hooks. Or you can, kind of front up and bubble on him yourself. And with Mauga, again, you can potentially bubble to interrupt his self-healing. Also, you're going to be playing in a situation with a lot of, again, people are going to be running a lot of Anas to try and enable their Hogs and Maugas or try and potentially counter what they assume is going to be an enemy Mauga or Hog coming out. And the cleanse is amazing in that situation. So I think Zen will actually be A tier. I think Zen will actually still be A tier. Purely because where Zen suffers is when people are diving him. People are not really going to be running a lot of dive. Or at least I haven't seen it yet. Maybe that will change as people discover something. Dive has never been strong in the middle ranks as it is. So while you may suffer against a potential lone Sombra switch or lone Tracer switch, and it really then comes down to, is my other support even vaguely looking out for me? Are they even vaguely helping me? But in the Hog-Mauga interaction, which is, again, I think you have to look at the state of Overwatch in that sense, where it's like the most powerful thing often dictates what other things are played. So if you cannot kill a Hog, if you cannot kill a Mauga, you just lose, and Zen is very good at doing both. You discord them at the right time. And again, in the middle ranks, you're going to notice that the enemy tanks don't dodge the discord very well. So just wait until they're basically in a situation where they can't run away too far, or they've committed by using, like, let's say the Mauga is charged in, or the Hog is like, he's used his pig pen and he's walked forwards, he's not got any cover, he's trying to hook your tank. You just discord and then you farm these guys because their hitboxes are massive. You just get so much damage in. Just try and keep your crosshair at head height and go to town. Ana, I think S tier, simply because at this point she may as well be a must pick. Now, there's going to be a lot of heat on Ana, and I've already seen it. People are not happy with the power of anti-nade in particular. But I would like to point you to the fact that if anti-nade didn't exist, what the hell would we do about these two guys? If it was not for anti-nade, these two guys would not exist. Or if it would not be for anti-nade, these two guys would just not die. Sorry. If it was not for anti-nade, these two guys would not die. The counter argument might be that these guys are balanced in a world where they have to face against Ana. But I think if we nerf anti-nade, it's just gonna be doubly Hog Mauga forever. If you get anti-nade nerfed, it's gonna be like a horrendous state of Overwatch. Sombra, I think, good enough. There's still not that many people who play Sombra. I think it's gonna depend on what's going on, who's playing what. Still remains like a good answer to specifically Widowmakers, like just incredible. You just farm them, and still has the potential to like actually spawn camp pretty well and do a good amount of frontline damage. She's actually pretty stable hero, and I think that with the EMP buff, the ability to shut down Cage is potentially good as well. You just EMP the Cage away, and then the Mauga is kind of like stuck expecting to have caged. So I think probably somewhere like that. I'm going to put Orisa in only good for counterpick. I was tempted to put her in bad, but I don't actually think she's bad. I just think that the one thing she was good at, she's not good at anymore. Why? Because Hog is not interruptible anymore. The one thing that Orisa was really good at was shutting down a Hog. She still fares very well in the Reinhardt matchup. Still does very well against Ramattra. But again, these are not heroes that are dominant in any way. They're not particularly getting massive amounts of pick time. And previously it was like, okay, they're running Hog. My best answer is Orisa. But now you cannot interrupt the Vape. And you cannot interrupt his whole Hog. So the Spear, the Spin are not the power plays they once were, right? So I think more you're going to see her as a counterpick to like a Reinhardt or a Doomfist. And just chase them around. Or a Ramattra. At which she's still annoying and good. But again, those heroes are not going to be played a lot. I'm a huge Doomfist lover. So I'm going to put him in A tier. I don't think he's great against either of these guys. He's terrible against Hog. Again, now that you can no longer interrupt Hog, you're just screwed against as Doomfist. You kind of almost basically need to swap off. If you ever block in his face, he's going to hook you. The Pigpen can slow your cycle of cooldowns. You can't stop him. You can't interrupt his vape. Can't interrupt his ult. And if you're like, let's say he pops ult, you block, he hooks you, he then continues to ult you and you die. So you just don't interact with the Hog well at all. Mauga, I think you actually, my working theory is that actually Doomfist is a good answer to Mauga until the cage. Because for those of you who haven't seen it yet, if you get caged as Doomfist by Mauga, the only ability you can anymore use is the block. Like the other two get blocked out. You cannot use them. You're just dead. You're dead in the cage unless your team like was to life grip you out or something. I'm gonna put Moira in the counter pick purely because I know how many metal rank players love to run the Moira into a Genji. That's it. In truth, I think Moira is bad. If I was playing tank, I would lose. Like I would just like not be very happy if Moira was on my team. I recognize that there's a lot of Genji players out there and Moira love to suck them. So Moira do the suck and Genji die. I'm gonna put Brig in good enough. I don't think she's bad at all. In fact, anything but. I think she's actually still very strong. But you're not gonna see a lot of Brig because she's not very good in the Mauga Hog situation. In other contexts, she's great. You end up in a Hog mirror or a Mauga mirror or a Hog Mauga, and it's Ana Kiriko versus you on Brig and another guy. You're gonna lose because the Brig just doesn't interact well. But I still think she's very strong. This is not indicative of her power level. She's still very strong. And while I put her in good enough, I still know that there's no one in the metal ranks who ever plays Brig well. So don't use this as an excuse to play Brig and be shit and just bash into the face of a Hog and die. I'm gonna tell you something for real, guys. I'm gonna tell you something for real. Ball is actually good. But Ball is actually good until they counterpick you. But extremely until they counterpick you. As someone who is a relatively terrible Ball player, I was farming lobbies in GM5 with terrible Wrecking Ball gameplay simply by rolling around at the right times. That's literally it. Just roll around at the right times, distract them. Because here's the thing that people always forget about Wrecking Ball. Very good players know to ignore Wrecking Ball, and very good players know to just ignore the Wrecking Ball. But most players spend an inordinate amount of time chasing the Wrecking Ball. And that is huge value. Like huge value. Ashe. Actually good. Not least because she triggers the dynamite burn, which lets Mauga crit. I see a lot of Ashe Mercy these days, and that's the one time maybe you'd be fine with a Mercy on your team when you're running like Mauga situation. She farms with the hitbox of Mauga. You can build Bob. Like Bob's actually very strong in these situations because you don't always want to contest the point against the Mauga. Like if you're an enemy tank, right? You're a bit tentative because you're like, I'm probably just going to lose the Mauga matchup there. Whereas Bob, you just throw Bob in there and he occupies the space, and then you guys can off-angle and do what you want. So Ashe is good. Now Bap remains very good. He's just not in his meta moment, basically. He's just not in a situation where you're gonna pick a bunch of Bap, because again, we're looking at Mauga land. He's not one of the supports you ideally want to pick in the Mauga situations. But if you did pick Bap, you wouldn't have a bad time. You would not have a bad time. Sigma, I think still A tier. I don't think he'll do too great against Mauga, just because I think his shield is like, it's just gonna get shredded. His grasp is good to potentially interrupt the Mauga, but that's about it. And I think once those two go, you're just kind of getting farmed by the Mauga. He can just like shift your rock. If you try to rock him, he'll just do his uninterruptible charge. If you got caught in a cage fight, you're probably dead. I don't think he's bad against Mauga. I don't think he's necessarily gonna hold his own against Mauga either. Echo, I think, is actually kind of really strong and people haven't quite caught on. Her ability to just kind of mass spam a tank is gonna be very effective. Bursting the tank is going to be good. The beam on the likes of Mauga Hog is going to be very good. Duping a Mauga is actually also going to be good, I think, because you can just play it like a mid-range, build, like spam the damage out and build your ult pretty fast. And then cage fight is great. Just drop the cage fight down. So I think Echo very good, actually. Might be one of the best DPSs at the moment, if not the best DPS. I think the other candidate for that role is probably Sojourn. Has been a really good pick since her launch, basically, or since her buffs post-launch. Continues to just put out good value. You can farm your railgun off of a tank still very reliably, and then try and right-click the backline. Mobility is great. The disruptor shot is really, really powerful, actually. Underrated, like how much space you can control with it and how much damage you can just take over for your ultimate. Sojourn, very good. Very good. Not the friendliest heroes in the metal ranks. Again, if you're gonna like want to min-max, Bastion's better. Probably Echo easier than Sojourn. Hanzo easier than them all. But yeah, Junk Queen in A tier. She's not bad against Mauga. She's not great, though. I've tried a little bit of running Junk Queen against Mauga, and it doesn't feel so bad. Like, you can kind of poke well against him. You're not feeling like you're winning the war. At least that's how I felt. I've not felt like I'm winning this battle. I'm kind of just in it. Outside of those situations, she's a very good pick. And again, if they're not running, like, let's say, Ana Kiriko and countering everything you do, a lot of fun. Can definitely get kills on her own. A way of keeping good control over your own game, because you can kind of reliably do stuff for yourself. Kiriko S tier. I mean, I know there's a bunch of support players who are like, but Kiriko's win rate is really low. And it's like, well, yes. But that doesn't mean she's a bad hero. It means a lot of bad people are playing her. I think Kiriko is going to be like, again, I think Ana, Kiriko, Mauga. What you're seeing up here on the S tier is if you're running this and they're not running this, you just kind of win. Again, assuming equal competence, right? Like, you could have someone flexing on the Ana Kiriko who doesn't know what they're doing against elite one-trick Mercy Lifeweaver duo, and they'll lose. And I've been in those games. However, if assuming equal competence, you guys run Mauga, Kiriko, Ana, they're running, let's say, Mauga, Lucio, Mercy, it's over. Like, they cannot win. If you guys are like, even if you're like gold level, as long as you're equally gold level, you just cannot lose on the Ana Kiriko side. The cleanse obviously is the one thing that can save Mauga from getting naded. Still good for Hog too. And so my theory for why the win rate is so low is that people just do the dumbest shit on Kiriko because you can. Because you can go for the dumbest flanks, and because Awkward made it really popular to like just perma flank in the backline and then teleport out. A lot of the Kiriko players, I noticed, they're just, all their cooldowns are just on themselves. But people are like straight up TPing and Suzuing themselves every fight, every single time. I'm gonna put Ramattra in good enough. I've heard whispers that the buff is helping him out a lot, but I really don't think that he's better than the other tanks at the moment. I still don't really get fundamentally what Ramattra is good at. His biggest utility was like he blocks for a long time, but I think there's a lot of other tanks that can just kind of stall effectively. Like, I think if I wanted to just stall a point out, I would just pick Doomfist. Or, again, Hog is a great one too. I don't think his lethality is particularly high. He's like a bit of an all-rounder, which means he's also just not that effective at any one specific thing. Lifeweaver is like A tier against a Mauga. A Mauga mirror, I don't want a Lifeweaver. But if I'm not running a Mauga mirror, I kind of want a Lifeweaver because he can yoink them out of the cage. And again, outside of GM, you're going to see a lot of people cage solo. And I do this a lot as well, and I F this up all the time. Where I forget that Lifeweaver exists, I solo cage someone, they just get yoinked out, and now I'm trapped in my own cage, unable to go where I want to go. The thing about Lifeweaver is that he kind of stalls the game out a lot. He's not necessarily a hero that's going to like win you games. He stalls games out by just making it so things don't die. So he's like a good answer for like, okay, we just need to like survive and then we'll win. Illari, I think similar to Bap, is like in a different meta is still very, very good, very, very effective, but a specific meta for her. Like I don't think she's very good in the Mauga situation. Don't think she's very good in the Hog situation. So you're better off just like picking Ana, picking Kiriko, even picking Zen. But if that's not going on, if we're in that third situation of it's not a Mauga mirror, neither team is running Mauga, and we're going back to like a poke, then Illari is still very, very good. I will say, I think people should probably gravitate away from her in the middle ranks until you've climbed out, because I don't think people play around the pylon very well, and you will just see relentless amounts of tanks run past and never get healed. But in general, the power level of this hero is good. So that concludes our tier list for Season 8. Power level of the Overwatch heroes outside of GM. So from Bronze to Master and even low GM, I think this roughly rings true. It will be dominated a lot by Mauga and Ana and Kiriko subsequently, because Mauga is just kind of pay to win at the moment. Maybe the most pay to win we've ever had a tank be post buffs. But also Hog is right there, just underneath the surface, just slightly worse than Mauga. So there you go. Enjoy, like and subscribe.